An Ebola outbreak in West Africa is spreading out of control.
This protest, I have to point out, has really grown in size.
A dangerous Category 4 storm.
Hundreds of people still trapped in that rubble. The quake hit just before 1 p.m.
Workers have been killed in an ambush in South Sudan, in the deadliest single incident for humanitarians since the country's civil war began.
Duty of care is a hot topic. It is increasingly a hot topic as a result of some legal decisions that have come down. Sadly, though, not enough NGOs are still not focused on it. And later on, we will be finding out more and more there's going to be liability issues that they'll be aware of that put at risk the sustainability of many NGOs and humanitarian groups.
And you see more and more money shifting from low, medium risk areas to high risk areas. So these NGOs are following the money and see themselves now situated in a high risk area. While they prepared for medium risk, but Africa, parts of Asia are destabilizing in a rapid rate, and that's where the NGOs work. So I think it will get worse, it won't get any better.
Things have become more dangerous. I think that when you look at it over the past 25 years, what I see, there's been less respect for humanitarian workers, for instance. You know, they have come under attack more often. Their neutrality or their impartiality is less respected. So there's a higher risk and a higher pressure to perform.
I think as an NGO, you have to take it seriously, because in the end, if it's too dangerous, if you don't have your duty of care, your safety and security in order, it will not be possible anymore to support people in need abroad. So your work will basically end, and it will be taken over by armies and private military companies.
You shouldn't have to worry about safety. You have to be that doctor. I think for humanitarian workers, it's not just being the doctor or the water engineer or the other professions. A humanitarian aid work is a profession in itself, and it includes some safety management in there and security management in there. So for me, that's the thing. It has to be treated like safety issues in Ebola, or doctoring with gloves on their hand when they're doctoring. It has to have the same status of demanding of the time, the prioritizing of their time. So that's the biggest thing that I feel has to change.
Some NGOs have taken a different stance on duty of care, and now their main priority is not, for example, the protection of their core workforce, but the mission. And so they sign waivers in which they tell their people the primary issue here is to develop and deliver a project, and secondary is your well-being, which is a really hard pill to swallow at times and has a lot of different implications. But there are people out there who accept this, and because the programs have great program criticality, lives are based on these decisions, not only from the implementers, from the people receiving the aid too on the other side. And that's why I feel they go on this very noble mission. But still, duty of care, if you lose your workforce, how are you going to implement?
One of the things I often ask early in an engagement with an NGO is, so what's your emergency response plan if you have a medical emergency in the field? And 7 out of 10 times somebody will fish around in a wallet or a bag and pull out a card from an assistance service, and they'll say, this is our plan. Call these guys. And I say, well, that's an incredible resource, but it's not a plan.
I think it's a cultural issue. It's this culture of we're doing good, we're going to a country where people are in need, and we'll send staff who will give them food or shelter or whatever the mandate of your organization is. And that used to be enough, like 10, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, but not anymore. Local rebel groups, even governments are now bombing NGOs.
It's those other areas, for example, the major earthquake in Haiti several years ago. You had a number of organizations trying to help, landing in Port-au-Prince, landing at the airport once it opened, with no idea what they were getting themselves into. The increase in kidnapping, the increase in dangers from a health point of view, crime point of view. They were just out there trying to do the right thing. And so I don't think many of the employees, especially in their early days, have that appreciation of the risk. But that's why it's incumbent upon the leadership and management of that organization to walk them through the risk.
From corporate side, they see duty of care and security as a hindering element more than an enabler. And so this culture must change, and people should be aware and trained properly. Companies should approach and make sure that their staff are capable and understand the risk in a certain place and have the proper tools and training to mitigate those risks to an efficient state. And also people should be aware of their limitations and boundaries.
Taking action, taking real action, it's also cultural change. It's not only doing this and this and this and this. It has to be specifically in the management. It has to be within their daily awareness, actually.
So caring should be a competence for all the leadership, all people in the organization. That's the only way you're going to integrate it in your culture, in your management, and in your governance structures. But overall, in the behavior and the interaction of the people, make them a team and make them able to do a good job.
If you have an expectation that your organization is going to take care of you going in, and by going into these hostile areas or complex areas, then by default the reverse is true. You have to accept that there's going to be some level of intrusion on privacy. Duty of care isn't only on the side of the organization. It's a partnership.
It's a very controversial topic because it includes signing documents, like informed consent, that the staff person understands the dangers and risks of going to places when all they want to do is the right thing, feed the children, but help with medical clinics, things like that, which is all great. But increasingly, unfortunately, we're in a real world of challenges and liability. And so I think an organization cannot separate its duty of loyalty from its duty of care.
Duty of care, I think, goes both ways, and is a symbiotic relationship in between people creating policy and legal limits to what people can do or cannot do in the field, and then the actual person at being aware and respecting those boundaries.
Basically, the question is there something like free time, like your own time when you're traveling abroad? Personally, I don't, especially in high-risk area, I don't think there's such a thing as free time or your own time.
There is an obligation by employees and staff not to undercut the organization's duty of care obligations.
And I think in the age of the internet, the reputation matters a lot more than it used to. It's harder to hide things, and staff should sort of expect that it's going to change, that there will be more and more, I don't want to say it's intrusive, but more and more requests that if you are on company business, they have a right to know where you are, and certainly have a right to let's say, track you within certain limited means.
If you have a staff person going to do some training in Mombasa, Kenya, and they want to go to the beach for the weekend or something, and they don't want to phone in where they are or do the phone tree thing, and something bad happens to them. Well, they have essentially undercut their organization's duty of care, which puts to risk the funding for the organization and the sustainability of the organization.
When we are exposed to high-threat environments, we come back and we're physically in one piece, but sometimes we bring a lot of psychological issues with it because of the hardness of the environments and the daily demands. And so I think duty of care should be extended to people that come back and then have some sort of support at home to deal with issues that they probably will develop when you're in high-stress environments. To begin with, you come back, you're exhausted. That's rule number one. And you come back to a high-paced environment. You've gone, and I've come back and I have 2,500 emails waiting for me. And you're tired because of the stress that has been taken. And it takes you to burnout stages. And that's not good for anybody, nor the company, nor to the person. And this level of stress, this level of danger sometimes can become addictive. And people need to be aware of that fact.
I generally feel that there's a stigma to put your hand up and say, I don't feel comfortable with what's happening. And I think that's a real shortcoming in aid organizations and their operations. If you take the example of on a ship, I think the person who comes up to the captain and says, "We're leaking," might be recognized as thank you for speaking up and not staying silent about the issue. I think for the person that talks about their mental health with the same authority as a physical health problem, yeah, it's still being treated differently. I was shot in my leg and I have PTSD. People really want to talk about the leg and they're just really uncomfortable about the thing that was more debilitating to me, which was my PTSD. And I think until mental health and physical health are talked with the same authority and the same openness, or security is talked about any other constraint. I'm concerned about funding. In our third quarter, the funding might be changing and might risk our program, or I'm concerned about security. This issue might impact our programming. Until those two things are talked about equally, I think there's some room that we have to go.
No, I can't emphasize enough that I really feel that the psychosocial level of care given to the NGO workers as a whole needs to be improved, especially post-disaster situation. You see things that just really mess with your psyche, and they're hard to deal with. And a lot of times these folks come back from a trip like that and they're expected to be in the office the next morning giving a debriefing about the trip, and the focus turns to fundraising.
For the organizations, for the managers, they should be equipped. They have to be equipped as well to monitor their staff to see if their well-being is being covered. If the people in the field are under extreme stress, that will influence their behavior, but can also influence their decision-making processes, which can affect the security both ways. So it's a matter, we think, mainly of good preparation and of good monitoring, and to keep it on the agenda.
How do you care for people who come back? It's about debriefing. It's important for their mental health, but it's also for the organization to learn about what happened. How did our duty of care program run? How did our procedures actually work? To learn from it and to improve those guidelines, those procedures.
Whether it's evacuation from South Sudan or Yemen, violence in any number of places, there's incredible stress placed on humanitarian and NGO workers. I do think finally there's rising awareness of this issue and the need to really support staff, because ultimately that is the goal of the duty of care structure. And I think if you're falling down at that end, that aftercare piece, you conceivably aren't meeting those obligations.
I think it's actually not about the duty of care, but the intention to care. I think it's very important for people, when they do this kind of work, to feel that they're being cared for, that somebody cares about them. Not in the sense of policies, but the sense of personal attention.
More organizations are feeling stronger and stronger about these issues. It's about their people, which is really their key resource.
But increasingly, the degree of risk, globally in particular, is such that a lot of organizations are bringing in more experienced, skilled managers and leaders. And part of that is to develop policies and procedures. Now that flies in the face of how these organizations want to operate. They want to operate loose, free, flexible. They don't want to be hindered by policies and procedures and things like that. They just want to go out and do the right thing for people in need. And unfortunately, that is no longer a luxury. And so what a lot of organizations are trying to do is educate themselves.
One of the challenges is that you can have a great policy, but you might not know how it works in practice. Don't just invent something. Don't just create a policy, maybe with the best intentions. But ask people in the field, ask your local staff. As a director, I made a lot of trips to the field, and I sometimes ended up in situations with teams where I thought, okay, so this is how they deal with our security policy. And I didn't blame them for it. I went back and tried to understand what actually needed to change in the way we developed the policies so that they could work with it.
You know, for a half-hour meeting of solidifying onto an objective and a half-hour or a 5-minute mention on any safety or security concerns and how are we going to manage them, that's what it takes, and with that you can be much more effective in the field. You know, we can take parallels from any industry that is high risk outside of this. The airplane industry, firefighters, you don't see firefighters running around. They walk and they do things methodically and to the point, and they deal with high risk fires, their thing. I think a lot of that is prepared in trainings beforehand such that they can respond appropriately in those ways. But yeah, there's too many parallels for us to realize that the adrenaline junkie is an inappropriate approach to serious humanitarian issues.
The challenge is translating that compassion and care to concrete, practical policies and procedures within your organization when many organizations simply are not set up from a compliance point of view to do that. And so it becomes much more than just doing the right thing. It becomes actually critical to move forward with these kind of programs.
Boards of directors have to take this issue very serious. It has to have their attention. They have to behave in the right way, so they have to somehow role model. Yes, we do care, we worry about security issues, and we act on it. And they have to have the right competences. It's not something you do overnight, but you have to take care of it as a normal management process and improve your operations on it. So if we talk about policy and practice, the big challenge is how do you as a director actually judge what's happening in the field and what actually works in the field. And I think that is not about management experience, I think it's about field experience. I think the director of an organization like this should have experience in this kind of situations, him or herself. Without this kind of experience, you're not able to judge what's really happening. You're going to be trusting all kinds of systems and what people tell you, and it's not going to work and protect and help the people in the field.
Insurance companies are getting tougher on either giving a discount, it's the carrot stick approach. You either give a discount on your premium if you have a duty of care policy, or they will raise your premium if you do not. So insurance companies are going to be part of the solution to this in a very large way.
Ultimately, it's when something happens that insurance is going to matter. And it isn't all created equal, and making sure you realistically looked at your risk and matched that with insurance programs to effectively respond is crucial. And I think it's important to make sure, again, that it's tailored and that there's a true conversation about the work and the risk to be able to effectively match, so that in those hopefully rare instances where you need to rely on that, it is actually there and responsive.
The thing is that money is not the problem anymore. All the big donors and also the smaller donors now say, please incorporate safety and security in your budget, because they also understand that otherwise the project won't be completed, it won't work.
A lot of times the expats are insured. So something happens to the expats, you've got medical, you've got good coverage, but you're in a situation where you're hiring many local nationals and they're not being offered insurance. Well, you know what? They're people too. They're working sometimes for the same organizations.
One of the biggest problems too is that when they look at the financials, they don't realize that the potential downside of the money that they'll put up front for such a program could potentially offset millions of dollars in litigation that could come back. So they see an upfront cost of what a duty of care program would cost, but when it comes down to it, if something was to happen to some of their staff, like some of the litigation that's happened in the past, it could bankrupt them both reputationally but also financially, whereas putting that money up front, they wouldn't, it would certainly help mitigate the cost of those things.
If you want to have impact, you have to take care of people as well. It's not a cost, it's an investment. You'll have a better program, better impact, when that person going there comes back, gets a proper debriefing, gets a proper break afterwards, well, brings back the lessons learned, includes them in his next mission and his new program, and continues again. It's cost efficient to invest in the care for the people so that they can do a good job for a long time.
Understanding the risk, understanding the environments, and frankly, those environments change. They change quickly. They may change dramatically and suddenly. Building that awareness, technology plays a key role. Also in updates, the fact that we can carry with us what, is in effect a computer at any point in time and get pushed updates on a security environment, both where you are, but I think importantly as well, if you're in transit, where you're going, I think makes a huge difference in that building awareness piece.
For me, duty of care only works if you have the real picture of the risks out there, but also the real picture of where all your people are.
Chances in high-risk areas that something goes wrong is high. That's why it's called a high-risk area. If they don't know where you are, it's a lot harder to help you.
I mean, having worked and traveled so much of all those years, I would be happy, for instance, if I would be traced. Because I know from experience that organizations do not always know exactly where the person has gone or where he is staying exactly. And it can take time, very valuable time, for them to find out.
These systems are designed to support those staff in the main. Ultimately, if done right, that then helps protect the organization. You can't be the Department of No. And I think all of these pieces in the duty of care system need to be framed in that way. Not as a constraining element. Here's how we're going to box you in. But here's the support system that is going to enable you to better do your work and be supportive. There's a lot of risk out there, and you're going to encounter risk as part of NGO and humanitarian work. If you're not prepared for that, then it's probably not a business to be in. It's about managing that and being able to respond, and that's what this structure should be there for, not to stop people from doing the work that they need to do.
In my experience, I think that most NGOs like to think that they have a duty of care because they do truly care about their employees. It's not to say that they don't, but to what degree that can be implemented, to what degree that's actually put into practice is something different.
And so then the applicability in the field, I think, is another big part of duty of care. How feasible is it to do it? And how willing is your people to apply it?
For me, duty of care is the obligation to prepare ourselves. We cannot guarantee safety of security, especially not to the areas where most humanitarian organizations go through. But we can do everything what is within our means to prepare ourselves by training, by practicing, by making sure we have the right policies, by monitoring where the people are, by informing people in time, before they go, during their stay, but also afterwards to evaluate and learn from that.
Our aid workers, they will want to take every risk there is to help those people. But remember that as an organization, you're responsible for the people sending abroad.
Basically just start somewhere. Start maybe with training or with tracking and tracing or with writing a security policy. But start doing something.
In the old days, duty of care was the right thing to do, morally and ethically. It was do the right thing for your staff. And that worked to some extent, but increasingly as NGOs, humanitarian workers got in the crossfire of some very violent conflicts around the globe, and injuries and death were taking place, they realized they had to formalize this a little more. But we're still at the early phases of this. It's an educational issue, it's a leadership issue, it's a management issue. Cost-wise, you don't need to spend a lot of money on this. You just need to focus on it and pay attention to some of this stuff and making sure that everyone in the organization is aware not only of the organization's obligations, but of the employee obligations. So it doesn't take a lot of financial resources necessarily, but it takes some thinking. You can never eliminate risk globally. You just can't eliminate risk. But there are things you can do in a duty of care program that mitigate the risk of something bad happening to your people.